Good day, everyone. Our last topic for this course relates to the limbic system. And although it's part of the limbic system, we're going to introduce the hypothalamus and its role in a little bit more detail than the other areas of the limbic system. As usual, we start familiarizing ourselves with the components of the limbic system. Then we will discuss how this system operates to process information and to generate, store, and recall events such as memories and emotions. Finally, we will introduce the hypothalamus, as I mentioned, and discuss its function in maintaining homeostasis. To give you a general idea of what we're talking about, the limbic system, this system encompasses all the structures that in this cartoon are loosely encircled in the red line, of course excluding the midbrain and part of the pons that fell within this circle. So, without delay, let's start reviewing the anatomical distribution of the components of the limbic system, indicating the role of each of its components. The cingulate gyrus, which being part of the brain is a long tract located in the medial aspect of each cerebellar hemisphere above the corpus callosum. Different areas of this structure have different roles, but at this point, suffice to say that this structure is involved in developing emotions, which are then processed, learned, and committed to memory, as well as responding to them in an automatic and endocrine fashion. Thus, this area is highly involved in several aspects of animal behavior. It is also involved, in conjunction with the brainstem, in respiratory control. The perihippocampal gyrus, located at the base of the structure related to the limbic system, is in charge of encoding memories in order to store them and then to retrieve them. Just above or sitting on top of the parahippocampal gyrus is the hippocampus. This area processes and creates memories that will be stored for a long term. This is the area that is first affected by Alzheimer's disease. This area is also in charge of realizing the spatial location of the animal. Being in a room, for example, the awareness that the ceiling is about 8 feet high and that you are at 1 meter of one wall and 5 meters from the other. This is an unconscious awareness, but is there. It serves as reference to find objects or to plan movement within that space. Immediately underneath the cingulate gyrus is the dentate gyrus, which is in charge of creating what is defined as episodic memories. Episodic memories refer to those activities that happen repeatedly over time. For example, the access to a milking parlor every day in the morning and afternoon. These type of memories are created by the dentate gyrus. This is one of the areas of the brain that develop late. That is, most of it is formed after the animal is born. In some experimental animals, it has been shown that up to 85% of this area is developed after birth. Then we have the fornix. Located under the corpus callosum at both cerebral hemispheres, the fornix is kind of a highway through which connection between many areas take place. In particular, the fornix is the main path for the hippocampus to send information to the hypothalamus and to the mammillary bodies, as well as the thalamus, which, as you well know by now, is a hub to distribute information throughout the brain. The mammillary body connects the amygdala and the hippocampus to the thalamus. It helps transmit the memories that the hippocampus has recalled. The next structure is the amygdala, which is placed dorsal and cranial to the hippocampus. Its function is to process and memorize a strong emotion, as well as participating in the decision-making process about engaging in emotional responses. The decision to act aggressively in a given situation is processed here. The feelings of hunger, fear, and anxiety are also processed here. The stria terminalis is basically a bundle of fibers that interconnect areas involved in emotional and behavioral responses associated with stress. As such, it forms reciprocal connections to the cortex, amygdala, as well as brainstem areas and some nuclei in the hypothalamus. The thalamus is a large structure made of two halves located in the center of the limbic system, above the midbrain and below the cerebral cortex. The thalamus serves as a relay for all information coming from the peripheral nervous system as sensory information, except those related to olfaction, and distribute this information to the cerebral cortex and to the hypothalamus. The thalamus also participates in regulating sleep and alertness. It also contributes to the process of consciousness through thalamo-cortico-thalamic circuits. In the center we find the corpus callosum, which is an area of communication between the two hemispheres of the cerebrum. Every area in one side has a counterpart in the other hemisphere, and these communicate through the corpus callosum. The olfactory bulbs, located ventral to each cerebral hemisphere in the front of the brain, almost on top of the nasal cavity from where they are connected directly to olfactory receptors. This is the only brain structure which receives direct information from sensory sources. It plays several roles, all related to olfaction. It is able to recognize different scents and associate them with specific memories. Indeed, the best retriever of stored memories is the sense of smell, more than visual cues, auditory cues, or tactile information. Memories related to smell are also the longer-lasting memories, and they are attributed to the direct communication between the sensory neurons and the processing unit, in this case, the olfactory bulb. They also play a role in discriminating odors. Some animals have extremely sensitive sense of smell with a high ability to discriminate scents. Drug-smelling dogs are an example. Pigs capable of detecting truffles, and service animals, specifically dogs, that can predict the manifestation of several episodes such as seizure or a drop in sugar level in care of a diabetic people. The last and very useful role of the olfactory bulb is the capacity of disregard background non-threatening odors. You will experience this later on when you are in rotation if you visit a farm and enter into a pig barn. Initially, you will feel the smell very strong and pungent, perhaps unpleasant. After 10 minutes, in the barn, you will completely disregard the smell and you will not notice it anymore. Finally, we have the hypothalamus and the hypophysis, which is a very small structure located at the base of the brain. In this picture, is highly magnified. In reality, the hypophysis is not bigger than a grain of rice. The hypothalamus contains many specific nuclei or groups of neurons which carry out similar functions. Although the limits of each nucleus is not sharply delineated, each hypothalamic nucleus is recognized as having one or more specific functions. All the functions of the hypothalamus are geared toward maintaining the body within a range of homeostatic conditions. Many of these activities are achieved through endocrine control. We're going to dedicate a lot more time to introduce this structure now, because next semester it will be in the forefront of most of the physiology lectures. Let's review last time all the parts together. We have the cingulate gyrus. Immediately underneath is the dentate gyrus, with the corpus callosum in the middle, joining and communicating both hemispheres of the cerebrum, followed by the fornix, the thalamus, the mammillary bodies, the amygdala, the stria terminalis, the parohippocampal gyrus, and the hippocampus, the olfactory bulb, and finally the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus connects with most structures of the limbic system. Thus, it receives and processes sensory information and generates information that can be distributed into three main areas. To the autonomic nervous system, this information travels via the brain stem and the reticular formation. Thus, it goes through the midbrain or mesencephalon, pons, and medulla oblongata. To the diencephalon and cerebrum, this information travels principally via the frontal area of the thalamus. And to the hypophysis, the information sent to the hypophysis regulates the secretion of several hormones which control many vital functions of the body. An entire section of the next physiology course is dedicated to this subject. We mentioned that the hypothalamus was made out of different nuclei, each with different neurons carrying out similar functions. Here we have all the nuclei of the hypothalamus. At this point, I want you to realize the diverse range of activities that each part of this organ is capable of carrying out. Therefore, I will mention the type of activity without entering in any detail. I am not going to expect you to memorize this. Simply, I want you to get a sense of the diversity of functions, most related to maintaining homeostatic condition, although specific functions as reproduction is also controlled by this structure. We have the arcuate nucleus, which has a neuroendocrine control, that is, secretes certain hormones from neurons, hormones that will regulate different processes in the body. For example, it secretes neuropeptide Y, which is involved in several homeostatic processes in the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. It also secretes dopamine, which inhibits release of prolactin in the hypophysis. Some of its neurons sense caloric content in circulation and, if needed, will reduce hunger. The suprachiasmatic nucleus plays a role in the maintenance of circadian rhythms. It does this through the secretion of several hormones that regulate body function during a daily or 24-hour cycle. The supraoptic nucleus detects the state of hydration and, if needed, secretes antidiuretic hormone, a hormone which will help the kidney to retain water. The medial preoptic nucleus is involved in detecting blood pressure and viscosity. If it is too viscous, it will trigger the sensation of thirst. Also has a neurosecretory role, as well as monitoring temperature in order to control thermoregulation. Some role related to sexual dimorphism has been attributed to this area, specifically reproductive and prenatal behavior. The lateral preoptic nucleus is more specific in the control of non-rapid eye movement. The paraventricular nucleus has a neuroendocrine role, partially dedicated to water conservation through production of vasopressin, as well as oxytocin to regulate milk secretion. It also participates in the autonomic control of appetite and participates in stress management. The anterior hypothalamic nucleus is involved in thermoregulation as well as in sleep, while the dorsal hypothalamic nucleus controls physiological processes and behaviors related to body weight and ingestive activity. It also participates in circadian activities. The posterior hypothalamic nucleus participates in regulation of temperature by inducing shivering thermogenesis. So when you go out to shovel snow without proper protection, your posterior hypothalamic nuclei will try to make you feel better by inducing shivering. It also induces an elevation of blood pressure if needed. The periventricular nucleus has a neuroendocrine role, while the dorsomedial nucleus contributes to control the body weight through the behaviors of feeding and drinking. The lateral hypothalamic nucleus has a neuron with a range of somehow unrelated functions. It participates in response to pain, contributes to thermoregulation, as well as to digestive function and control of blood pressure. Finally, the ventromedial nucleus has a multiple regulatory functions through neurocrine secretions. Let's see now how some of these nuclei may participate in the regulation of different physiological processes. We will start with thermoregulation. We have a dog with a given temperature, which either for environmental conditions or physiological reasons is a little bit higher than what the set point or homeostatic condition dictates to be. Two of the nuclei participate in the short-term regulatory process, the medial preoptic nucleus and the lateral preoptic nucleus. In the long term, the paraventricular nucleus will enter the process of control. In response to the elevation of temperature, the preoptic activity, both of these nuclei, will increase and will trigger three mechanisms to reduce the temperature. It will induce vasodilation, so heat could be dissipated easier, and it will also induce panting, which is the mechanism on dogs to evapotranspirate, thus cooling the body down. Dogs do not sweat. That's why the only area through which they can evaporate liquid to cool down is through the tongue. In other animals, the same condition of elevated temperature will be dealt by sweating instead of panting. If the condition of hyperthermia persists for a long time, then the paraventricular nucleus will try to adapt by reducing the production of TRH as a mechanism to reduce metabolic activity in the body. Let's look at cardiovascular regulation. Imagine that an animal has an episode that leads to a drop in blood pressure. Several nuclei participates in the regulation of this system. First, the posterior hypothalamic nucleus detects the drop in blood pressure and it is stimulated. The response to the stimulation of this nucleus is to trigger vasoconstriction and to stimulate an increase in heart rate through action potential which are sent via the autonomic nervous system. As you can see, this translates into an increase in blood pressure, but perhaps it was a little bit too much this time. That increase in blood pressure is then sensed by neurons in the preoptic area, which, as in the case of thermoregulation, will trigger vasodilation as well as a reduction in heart rate. This will translate in a mild reduction in blood pressure, bringing it to normal levels. Now let's look at how feeding activity is regulated. Imagine you have a starving animal. This animal, if he is normal, has a very stimulated lateral hypothalamic nucleus, making him continuously feel hunger. That is, he will perform a lot of food-seeking behavior, and if given the opportunity, he will have a great appetite to eat. Once the animal eats enough, the ventromedial nucleus will receive information about stretching of the stomach, indicating that it is full because the animal has eaten enough. The ventromedial nucleus will reduce appetite and the animal should stop eating. If the ventromedial nucleus fails to detect excessive eating and does not stop the behavior, the animal will end up like this, provided there is enough food available. Water regulation. Water regulation operates a little bit different. If the animal detects an increase in electrolyte concentration in circulation, two nuclei, the lateral hypothalamic nuclei and the supraoptical nuclei, will be stimulated, and they will try to solve the problem using two totally different approaches. The lateral hypothalamic nuclei will trigger the sensation of thirst, and this will lead to obvious drinking behavior. At the same time, the supraoptical nucleus will secrete the hormone, antidiuretic hormone, into circulation, which will lead to more water resorption by the kidneys, thus preventing further dehydration or increase in electrolyte concentration. Our last example for today deals with the stimulation of smooth muscles. This can be triggered by several situations. For example, the pressure that the fetus applies on the cervix, or the physical stimulation done on the teats of the cow prior to milking while cleaning them. Both will stimulate the paraventricular nuclei, which in this response will release oxytocin through the pars distalis of the hypophysis. Oxytocin will stimulate contractile activity in smooth muscles, which will translate in milk ejection, or in the case of a parturient animal, in the contraction of the uterus to expel the fetus. Well, that's all we plan to review today. Let's summarize what we went through. We reviewed the main components of the limbic system. Then we discussed how some of these components participate in creating and retrieving memories. And finally, we expanded a bit in the hypothalamus, and other than mentioning most of the nuclei that will make it, we provided an initial view of how these different areas participate in processes leading to maintain homeostatic conditions in the animal. This will conclude this 6th lecture that I have to do for you. So I have enjoyed doing it, and I hope that you will learn sufficiently. Thank you very much. Have a great day.